So yeah, let's get into the lack and excess. So
yes.
Your podcast, your amazing podcast.
Thank you.
Did it start this year, or has it been going?
Yeah, we started about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
But Benjamin and I had done maybe 4 or 5 podcasts together before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember hearing him on your
on the last
podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I like fair play for being so consistent and because you have the A side and the B side.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
It's a lot. It's a lot of output, but it's a delight.
It's a bit much. I think the furnace is burning a bit hot. But I mean, we'll see if the wheels come off, which they might do.
You've gone longer than I was expecting, actually, at the level that you're going. So,
yeah, I know.
Yeah. But yeah, it's called The Lack. So it's with Nina Power and Benjamin Studebaker. What is the lack that you're referring to in The Lack?
So the lack for me is the essence of existence. It's that from which we all come. The lack in terms of the name of the podcast, Nina's a philosopher, and so she's obviously English, and her tradition maybe is, she's very interested in a lot of French thinkers. I, for various reasons, I'm not an academic or anything, but I'm really interested in French theory and Lacan, and Benjamin's American. So, we have like slightly different positions, which I think is also something that is really lacking today, is being able to have conversations with people who maybe on some things, largely we agree on a lot of things, but there's a lot of things we obviously don't agree on. Or, not necessarily we don't agree, but we can come to a productive discussion, and we wouldn't have a discussion without like certain different perspectives. So there's a lack in that sense in terms of having this kind of like entering into a discussion. I think it's always a positive thing. And then a lack in terms of we felt like maybe expressing our certain position was a bit lacking, because you obviously today have things that are very right and left, although the terminology right and left I don't think applies to the right and left philosophically. And that what is lacking is the left, and this is the left in a Todd McGowan sense, which is an embracing of the lack, rather than turning lack into opposition. And of course, we see in quote unquote politics, I say quote unquote politics because I don't think you can be political without tarrying with lack. You see an attempt to annihilate lack, contradiction, and always focus on opposition, which is understandable given our economic system. But then the lack for me, lack is sort of a philosophical term that relates to like Lacanian psychoanalysis. And there are many different forms of lack. It's always talking about like Lacanian stuff. It sounds like really like sort of pretentious and complicated, but it's actually really not. Because anytime you really understand a term, you've kind of understood the whole philosophy. And a lot of terms relate to one another. So on my previous podcast, my co-host and I did like an A to Z of the terms we talked about. And then we realized after going through loads of terms, we were saying exactly the same thing every time. Right. Because basically it's really about understanding how human subjectivity develops, what causes human subjectivity, what causes language, and where that comes from. And that always comes from an essential lack. We are, as humans, born too early, unlike other mammals who can get up and run, like you see on a David Attenborough documentary, an elephant that like just pops out and gets going. Animals, humans with our big heads, are born too early, and we are essentially fetuses outside the womb. By the way, I'm not a psychoanalyst. There's one thing I would say, it's funny, Jordan Peterson, when he was sort of doing his thing quite a lot in the media, would always say he was a psychoanalyst. And it was like, no, he's into Jung, which is different from, say, Freudian Lacanian psychoanalysis, very different. Mm-hmm. It's almost quite oppositional, actually. But he maybe is interested in Jungian psychoanalysis. He's not a psychoanalyst. And I'm definitely not a psychoanalyst. I'm interested in Lacanian, Freudian, Winnicott, Bion, Klein, all these people's writings, but absolutely not a trained psychoanalyst at all. But I do like the theory.
It takes quite a lot of training to be a psychoanalyst.
Oh my gosh. I think the average age, I'm in Belfast at the moment, and the average age of a qualified psychoanalyst is like 60.
Wow.
Because often you don't come to it until later on, and you have to go through so many years of training. So yes, I'm definitely not that. But
maybe one day.
Maybe one day, maybe in 30 years' time. But I also don't think I have the patience. I'm not a very patient person, so maybe when I'm old I will develop that trait. Who knows? But yeah, so we're born too early, and we're sort of fetuses attached to our mothers, and at some stage we are separated. We get to a stage where we start to be able to fend for ourselves, and that separation, there comes to a time we have to stop breastfeeding. We have to get out there into the world, and that separation generates a sense that we could return to a oneness that we had before we were subjective beings, thinking beings with our mothers. So we have this feeling, because we were conscious during that time where we were attached, that there was a oneness. And even in the womb, there was a oneness, but it's a oneness that's really a death, because we're not really alive then. But that separation, we're separate. It generates several things. One of them is this sense of an absence that we are sure on some level we can fill. But it's only that absence that creates us as separate human beings. But the separation also creates a frustration. As a separate being, suddenly you have to speak. Suddenly you have to, express yourself. You have to get things. You have to say, I want this, I want that, I need food, I need water. And that frustration, that lack of an ability to communicate, generates language. If we were able to communicate at all times, we would never need to speak. Peter Rollins, he famously, don't know how exaggerated the story is, but didn't speak for a long time, maybe until he was about 4, and they got sort of what do you call it, a speech therapist around the house, because it was like, why is he not talking? And the person discovered that it was because he'd sort of managed to get his sister, or his sister was really attached to him, to get things for him so he could communicate to her. Communication is direct, and language is more indirect, but to directly point to things, and she would get it for him. And so that lack of frustration meant that he never had to produce the facility to speak. But lack isn't just about language, because we experience...
does that mean he was like whole and complete before he was 4 years old?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously, because this is a funny thing with animals and stuff. Obviously, animals communicate with sort of grunts and shrieks and, whales with like ultrasound and stuff. But is that what you say? Ultrasound, maybe. But it's not the same as language. So maybe, yeah, he was more, he hadn't entered into human subjectivity probably in a full sense. But so there's a connection between subjectivity and language. But lack is almost more fundamental than that. In a sense, this maybe sounds like a very strong statement, but we can start here and maybe break it down. Unless you really get this idea that lack creates, you end up being religious in a way. Because unless you don't have on without off, you don't have dark without light or light without dark. So the lack, the nothingness, the rupture, the crack in the universe is really what creates everything. It's a contradiction. It's a not. That's really what's fundamental. And if we believe that there is a wholeness, the wholeness cannot have just got here by itself. It has to be placed there by some bigger being than ourselves, some all-powerful being. But if it just appears whole, that there has to be some mind, quote unquote, behind things. Really, the only explanation for me, I mean, I could be wrong, but and I'd love to hear if somebody has a different point of view on this. But it's the crack, it's the rupture, it's the knot, it's the contradiction of the universe. That's really all that's essential, I think, and that generates everything.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It's quite a strong statement. I might regret it later when someone has a better way of saying this, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, and it's that sort of the contradiction that is the thing we try to almost solve or cure or like, eradicate, and that's what kind of leads to some of the stuff we've already talked about. That quest for the return to the the oceanic oneness of the womb and all of that.
Womb, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What about like excess? So you sort of said lack and excess.
Yeah, so they're tied to one another, and of course excess, a too muchness. Without lack, you wouldn't have this over investment that humans have in their subjectivity. And it's part of the things that differentiate us from animals. So this lack, for instance, this experience that we once had this wholeness, that we were torn from, we were wrested from our mother's breast, and we're missing something. And if we could only get back to that oceanic feeling, everything would be fine, we'd be taken care of, we wouldn't have to worry, our anxiety would be quelled. So that creates a sense within us, a sort of rupture within our subjectivity, a kind of crack, a thing, there's a gap there that we wish we could just, an itch we can't scratch, but if we could just overcome it, we could get back to oneness. And we find all kinds of things, and commodities, in terms of the market system, commodities say to us that they can fulfill that lack. But we overinvest in things in sort of a magical way, in a too much way, because we can't get back. And because we can't get back, because of that failure, we keep trying. So, for instance, I always use the example of Jeff Bezos, who has now infinite zeros in his bank account. If that money was able to quell, was able to really make someone happy, to really solve the problems of their life, you would stop accumulating. You wouldn't need to keep going. It's the failure that sustains it. And it's that failure to fulfill the lack that haunts us that creates this overinvestment in things. But the thing is, the overinvestment is really amazing and positive. Like, would we have like romance and even love and passions and hobbies if we were just this whole complete thing? We need that overinvestment to make life worth living. It's what makes life worth living.
Yeah. So,
and I think sometimes when people hear the word lack, they think, oh, that's just so boring or existentialist or, depressing. And you're like, no, it's actually the opposite. It's saying that because of this, we have all these wonderful things. Also, sometimes excessive investment can be horrendous. And I think the accumulation of all the zeros is an example of where it becomes really toxic. But we don't want to get rid of this overinvestment entirely. We want to understand how it operates in ourselves and how we can use it more productively to create a sort of fairer, better world.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Sort of, you can't get rid of that excess because it is a part of that failure to our failure as animals in terms of coming out too soon or whatever.
We're like we're failed animals.
Yeah. I love that idea.
We haven't been cooked enough.
Yeah.
We're underbaked.
I find like with the billionaire space race, essentially, like hearing them try and justify it through different ways, like whether it's, colonizing Mars or finding a way to get rid of all of the trash on the earth or whatever it is that they use as almost a moral reason for this. It is essentially an excessive enjoyment of something.
I mean, obviously they're like but many people pointed out the kind of like phallic and everything. But okay, there's the other thing that sometimes I'm like, we do offer, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and like obviously things that are projectiles that are shaped in a certain way, Otherwise
they just look like that.
They just look like that. But yeah, no, it is. But this is, this happened with imperialism in the 19th century. All kinds of imperialism. You have a moral justification, a religious justification, an ethical justification. You're bringing God, or you're bringing civilization, quote unquote. So yeah, we always have to use these. I'm always suspicious of them.
Yeah. So I mean, it'd be great to talk about So you're a filmmaker.
Yeah.
You probably said that earlier. So you've worked with Peter Rollins.
Yeah.
And the film that I was kind of blown away by is one called Alone, spelled with 2 L's. So all one.
That was Pete's idea, the name.
You're not a fan?
No. It was funny. I actually do like it. It did grow on me a lot. But a lot of, obviously, people say all alone. How is it all one? Obviously, it's all these 3 things at once. But when, I don't know why, I did GCSE Italian, so maybe this made me think this. But as soon as he wrote the word down, I was like, alone, as in like,
yes.
how you pronounce a pasta thing. So, no, but it's alone, which contains within it alone, all alone, and all one in our aloneness.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So how did you kind of start working with Pete, and what inspired this film?
So we met in 2015, and it was actually really weirdly one of these very odd coincidences. So I went to university for a while in France, to one of the ENS schools, and ENS is a school where basically all of these people came out of, with French theorists. So it's like really into a lot of the stuff. I've never been, when I say this, because I think maybe we'll talk about this a little bit in terms of religion. I've never been like confessionally religious. I didn't grow up in a quote unquote religious world, but I think we live in highly religious times, and the market system operates on a religious sort of mode. But so, and obviously Pete's into theology. But so I had done a degree in French and Spanish, and French essentially a literary degree using, and I obviously use a lot of these theorists and these ideas. And I'd been a teacher, still into all this stuff and still reading on the side. And then I became a filmmaker. And a couple of years into that kind of journey, I was in Belfast. Peter has a festival here. And I know Peter's sister, and she was going to one of the ends. And I decided to go, and there's a talk with John Caputo, who's a theologian. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, what? Like, these people are saying exactly that, he's saying exactly what, basically the vision of the world that my education sort of gave me. Although that's a sort of slightly different story, because a lot of what we were taught in terms of psychoanalysis in my degree, when I kind of got into it more outside of university, I realized this slightly misinterprets the whole thing. And I think film theory, which does use psychoanalysis a lot, took a massive wrong turn at a point in the 70s when Lacan was vulgarized in a really, really misdirected way. And I think this is the thing, because, talked about right and left and this kind of thing. All these terms and these sort of sets and groups often miss the point of the essence of, let's say, the text or the set of ideas that they believe they're embodying, quite ironically. So anyway, and then we got chatting, and I was actually going out to LA to a film festival for a short film, and Peter wanted to write this film. He'd sort of outlined and written a play, and I ended up staying with Peter. And then we wrote the script together, and we ended up making a film out of that. And during that time, I was out in LA, and Peter was doing a podcast with Rob Bell. He did like a 3-part series on God. And I was listening in to one of the episodes. And then this story, this Buddhist parable, was told by Peter. As soon as he said it, I was like, right, Irish language, ancient Ireland, bam, we're doing it. So I don't know what it was about that parable, other than as soon as I heard it, I was like, absolutely, we're doing it.
Well, so you had that sort of vision straight away?
Yeah, straight away. And I think it is partly, Freud said that I don't know how true it was that he actually said this, but it is said that he said that the only people who aren't psychoanalyzable are the Irish, because they've essentially understood the essence of the cure, which is ordinary unhappiness, accepting ordinary unhappiness. And so Irish art sort of embodies this, or a lot of Irish art does. I mean, a lot of other art coming from other nations does as well. But I was making films here in Ireland, so maybe that's also why I wanted to set it here. But there's an insight in it. I'm really drawn to things, and I think a lot of people are, where the lines between happiness and sadness are kind of blurred. But often the most intense and moving experiences we look back on and we think are, terrible and been filled with suffering and pain, but we realize that maybe we were happy in a way, and we can miss our happiness and our sadness. And I think there's something very uplifting about sadness. Lots of my films are kind of quite sad, but I like sadness. And I think that there's something really powerful in sadness. And in film, obviously film, because it costs a lot of money to make for very many reasons, often we're pushed to just make our film a commodity that might soothe or take someone on an escapist journey or confirm them into this oppositional, bad, infinite way of seeing the world. So when you're kind of making films that do the opposite of that console, that confront, that philosophize, it can be quite difficult. And interesting, I think also as well that we have this thing in the West of a kind of a modernized Buddhism, a vision of Buddhism, which is about balance and overcoming contradiction and stoicism and meditation. When this parable, I think, shows that within Buddhism and a lot of traditions that I think, we talk about the term cultural appropriation a lot, that often what we see as cultural appropriation isn't, but the imposition of an interpretation often is. So I would say that this missing of a greater sort of contradiction and darkness within Buddhism. But yeah, that there is it's something beyond this just, this commoditized version of Buddhism, which is like, if I just meditate 10 minutes a day, I can be a better, productive person who works well and gets a promotion and contributes to society.
Yeah.
Which is often the temptation for us.
Yeah, that's where it gets brought in, isn't it? It's like the mindfulness stuff that is essentially used to make you a more efficient or a slightly more peaceful worker. And
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful in Alone, and that parable of so the mother who's lost her baby, who's carrying her baby, goes to Woman in the Mountains.
Yeah, Woman in the Mountains. Yeah.
Oh, hey, sorry to interrupt. I was going to do this earlier, wasn't I? But I forgot. Let me just tell you the parable of the mustard seed properly, so that you kind of have a frame of reference for it if you've not heard it before. The brain in the me from the day of that conversation clearly wasn't operating quite properly. So the story that Alone is based on is about a woman whose only child, a very young son, had died. Unwilling to accept his death, she carried him tight to her heart around the neighbourhood, begging for someone to give her medicine to bring him back to life. One of her neighbours told her she knew of someone who could help, an old wise woman who lived a little way up the mountain. Taking her son with her, she trekked to find the fabled old woman and asked her to help. "Please, my son has died, and you must bring him back to life," she pleaded. "I can help," said the old woman. "I will need to concoct a potion, but I don't yet have the ingredients. You must go back to your village and gather mustard seeds from a household that has never been touched by suffering, death, or loss," the old woman instructed. "I will go right away," replied the grieving mother, as she went back down the mountain to begin asking her neighbours for mustard seeds. As she went from house to house, she found neighbours willing to give her mustard seeds when she asked for them. When she asked for confirmation that they had not been touched by suffering, death, or loss, they shared their stories with her, and away she went empty-handed. This happened over and over, and she was still without a single mustard seed. As she heard her neighbours' stories of suffering, death, and loss, she began to speak of her own, and gradually she was able to come to terms with the death of her child, and was able to bury him. In one of the original tellings of the parable, she observes, "It's not just a truth for one village or town, nor is it a truth for a single family, but for every world, this indeed is what is true. Impermanence."
Absolutely. And I think this is something that I've noticed really recently in terms of the enemy making. Because obviously Peter distinguishes a lot between loss and lack. So lack is something that marks everybody. And because of the lack, the rupture of existence, we are finite beings. We will always inevitably experience death, the death of those around us, loss, difficulty. And loss is tied to lack, because if we lived in sort of this immortal, perfect whole universe, maybe we wouldn't have loss. And some people experience more loss than others. Some people, for instance, under our system. And I think the trouble is unless we understand how lack, our attempt to overcome lack, and our belief in a utopia relates to the market system, we won't overcome it, and we won't be able to improve the lot of the outsider within the market system, the homeless, the oppressed, those who, in order to sustain the fantasy, we have to cast as the bad guy. And it will always be somebody, some group. So unless we understand that and understand lack, we can't overcome loss. But some people have experienced more loss than others, which sucks and is unfair. But if we angelicize those who suffer, we're also in this oppositional thing. And I think often we have to sustain the idea that there are some, nasty, wealthy, people who've never had any difficulty in their life. And that fantasy, and whilst it might be true that there are some people who do have that money makes life easier, we operate on at least two levels as humans because of this experience of rupture, where we have material fact, and materially some people's lives are easier than others. But in terms of a transcendent, more kind of quote unquote spiritual, I don't like the word spiritual, I use quote unquote because I don't want it to be religious. You do not get off scot-free. And in fact, sometimes our attempts to accrue, sometimes not always, our attempts to accrue money are a symptom that we really are suffering in terms of our quote unquote spirit or lack. But often we need to believe that there is this fantasy other who has everything in order to sustain the fantasy. And whilst it might be unfortunately true that some people have it easier than others, that religious belief that if only those people can't get a say because they, I've had it sometimes in my life, I sound posh, for instance, but that doesn't indicate anything about what really happens in someone's life. If you're posh, you can't be a leftist, or if you did this, you can't do that, or if you're a white man, you can't speak to the universal. And this idea that only people of a guarded group, because of their spiritual essence, their wholeness, their knowledge, their wisdom, can teach us, that is racist. And we have to, and it's kind of difficult to understand because two things are true at once. And this is the thing that Hegel taught us, and then unfortunately is lost in a lot of the descendants of Hegel. Often we hear this idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. No, there is no synthesis. There's no synthesis. There's only syllogism, which is not bringing two things together and sort of melding them together in a better balanced whole. It's having two separate truths that are true at the same time, which is really difficult for people to. The thing is, it's one of these things that's not necessarily difficult, but often we are taught in order to be able to get into society or to achieve a certain grade or to get a certain job or to move forward, to think in a way that doesn't allow for contradiction and syllogism. But so often, I think in film and in art these days, we can be concerned that if we depict everybody as suffering, then we are denigrating the special suffering of a given group. And that's what capitalism wants us to sustain. We have to realize that on this level that makes us human, this level of division, this level of a form of transcendent, it's not really transcendent in the sense of like a God-given something, but a too muchness. We are all condemned. And only if we understand that will we be able to get onto a footing whereby we can make a better world. If we have opponents, there will always be, the opponents only exist insofar they're a symptom of the fact that we retain a fantasy of a utopia. And we need to realize that, again, if there is a utopia, it's divided. So it's not really a utopia, but an OU, not utopia. And it's right here, right now. And the progressive, I think we're saying in terms of bad infinite, that over the horizonness is preventing us from really recognizing what we need to do. We live in a series of perpetual nows, and we only ever have the now. And the thing is, again, another thing that might be criticized by some people who might be more structuralists, and I would absolutely be a structuralist, but I believe that unless we read Marx with Freud, we're fucked. This sounds like very idealist and very kind of like people have to change their mind about this, but it's actually better material conditions help people come to this realization. And actually, this way of seeing the world shows that oppositions reduce when people are less materially precarious. So the point being, to tie it back to a question, is I think it's really important to put forward notions of a universal and a universal lack. And whilst we might not want to hear it because we want to believe, well, some people are special and some people are enemies, because they might, you hear words like pretty privilege, or a person of size, or a man has this certain privilege, and this, that, and the other. And whilst sometimes that is materially true, they are only materially true insofar as we have got a system that is generated, that is intrinsically linked to this oppositional system. So if we try to fiddle with these representational and identity things, well, we still have the system that generates them, but they'll just emerge in a different way. So it's this, and in terms of like the sort of Mobius strip dialectics, one is connected to the other. So understanding how oppositional thinking works will help us be able to maybe better stomach and better understand how to better distribute, how capital mobility is causing most of our problems today, and how we need to tax and redistribute. And then that in turn will lower our need to create oppositional thinking. That's kind of a long one. As I said, the thing that's annoying with this kind of stuff is like everything's tied to everything.
Yeah.
So as soon as you go off on one, you could just go on forever.
Yeah.
And then I should probably shut up at some stage.
I love it. I just, yeah.
And the other thing is, but as well, like I kind of am conscious that it sounds very complicated, and it is quite complicated in a way. But that I think it's by dint of just, I think we all sort of know it, not that there is, if there's the only essence that there is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, and these aren't my ideas, these are ideas of many people who have existed and written and stuff, is that lack. And the more we can confront our society with that experience of the universal, not contradiction, lack, the more we can kind of grasp it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's really traumatic actually sometimes for people to hear it. So sometimes people can be, when they first hear this idea lack, it's kind of like, no, because we're so drawn, we so are compelled to believe that the lack can be filled.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously progress narratives I think are always dangerous, but there is a positive in all of this, which is you can experience greater joy in the here and now. You can reduce one's compulsion to self-sabotage to sustain a fantasy. You can have better relationships with people. You can create a better society through this understanding. But as in terms of like opposite to that ad that you were reading, we can't predict where it's going, and we have to completely just drop that way of thinking in order that we possibly might get it. But again, as soon as, and often we have these sort of self-help stuff and manifestation, all these kinds of things, which are this horrible, distorted of the best of the likes of Buddhism or psychoanalysis and stuff, because it just wants to get to the utopia.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about any form of doing anything. It's just the belief in the utopia that sustains the misery.
Yeah. It's that it, and it's where you can sort of tie yourself up in knots, I suppose, as when you think, okay, what does that look? How do I get to that place where and it's like, it's rejecting that sort of utopian, the ideology of promise, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the ideology of promise is such a good, clear phrase.
Yeah. I really, really like that.
Yeah.
You can kind of understand exactly what that is talking about.
What that is,
yeah. And I think it's something I've, noticed a lot is our investment in that constant future, that ideology of promise, where we engage with the world at the level of learning about things or getting to things. Like, we see it in sort of the creativity world a lot. Like people will learn how to do something creative, or the theory of things, and it's, you never actually get to the practice. You never enter that place of where this is actually going to play out in real life. And I think a lot about the idea of play as well, and play within creativity, play within life, and how that is fundamentally detached from any outcome. Where it should be. I think we do quite well at having directed play and learning objectives within play, and we get that sort of the productivity enters.
Always enters it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we it's something to really just listen out for and be kind of guarded. It's the same, again, creativity and productivity have, I don't know how long it's been, but like brewing, probably a few decades, but like they should be fundamentally quite opposed in many ways. But a lot of websites and blogs and podcasts and all that sort of stuff are about both productivity and creativity as if they're synonymous, as if they're the same thing. And it's about being more productive, being more efficient with your creativity, being results driven and all of that stuff. And obviously there are, you work on a project, you kind of want to complete it, but like that's different. It's I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that the interesting thing is like they're quite oppositional, but they're very tied in a sense. Well, again, talking about the sort of dialectic and one leading into the other, that often when we hold ourselves hostage to productivity, believing that completing a project will be, the next thing in our career, and we absolutely have to do it. And we are, again, this is not to like moralize, because we all do it. I do it like every single day, because we live within these waters. We completely breathe the air of the ideology of promise. It's just everywhere. As Lacan said, God is unconscious. Like we think that we're beyond religion. We absolutely are not. And often the most religious people are the people whose God is not out there in the world, and recognized as such, as an external thing. But when we believe that finishing something or completing something will, close the gap of lack a little bit, we are very likely to self-sabotage and really not be good at working. Because if we ever got the completion of the project, which we obviously will at some stage, well, not always, but, we will realize that there's no fantasy. That, for instance, let's say our film gets into the Cannes Film Festival. Well, even if we're there, we're not, the next project's going to be super difficult, or maybe we'll realize that it doesn't really affect anything. It doesn't, we still feel empty. We still feel shit. And it's even more traumatic to have that gold medal in your hand and to be confronted with the meaninglessness of it. So we self-sabotage our way to sustaining something as a fantasy by not doing it, because at least we could believe, I got injured before the Olympics. If only I'd got gold. Yeah. The fantasy is still there. The gold is still there. And often a lot of people who go to, it's a real phenomenon for athletes who've been at the Olympics, that after the Olympics, they're completely depressed, confronted with the fact that it's just another thing. It's not, nothing has that transcendental power of closing that gap of lack, because you can never be returned to your mother's womb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's a funny thing, because we've all experienced it at different levels, but you keep believing that, say, the gold medal, like that's the thing beyond where you've been before is going to be different. Like you've experienced the disappointment of success many times in your life.
Many times, yeah.
Yeah,
you still believe
it.
Sometimes this is the thing, because we do operate on more than one level. And sometimes, yes, materially, like you might get some nice endorsements. People take pictures of you. You get a real rush from the race. That's all great, but we're talking about like that transcendental.
Yeah.
You never absolved. And obviously capitalism is a structuralized version of this promise. So we always are made to feel precarious, and we believe that releasing a record or becoming a fashion model or something will remove us from the fray, and we won't have the same horrible toxic pressures of precarity on our shoulders. But it never ends. It never ends. There's always the next thing. There's always something that will take that away from you. And actually, there's only ever like a tiny percentage of people who ever are beyond, precarity in this system. Obviously, in the past, when I think sometimes when we criticize capitalism or analyze it, we look at actually other forms of political economy and social structures like the aristocratic society or the feudal society, where there were people who, we read the books of Jane Austen, and obviously lots of people still like to read them today because there's a sort of aspect of them that we kind of believe in on some level, which is, the daughter of a landed gentry or of aristocracy, because she would become a worker in a field if she didn't get married to whatever. So in order to avoid that absolutely horrible fate that we all live in under capitalism, they absolutely have to get married. And so on some level, I think we still believe this fantasy today that, if only we meet someone rich, or if only we do this or that. But that reality of being a lady of the manor, which again was never really a lady of the manor, you still had ties to your community and responsibility, and you might have to give birth to 6 children, you might die until, so you're really not absolved that much. But we have, and I think this ties to your idea about we look to the past often, as all the people in the past were awful, or we read today's structure through something that we've seen in the past. But because we're so within the ideology of the time, it can be really difficult to get a picture of what we're dealing with today.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, reminding me of one of the reasons that I really love sport is because the failure to ever get there is so present.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's one of the things that's really, I'm sure as Todd McGowan talked about it, like the idea of winning football.
Yeah. Like it would just be over.
Yeah. What would that look like?
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen. And there is always another competition. There is always however final a final might feel, it's not the final. And it's where I find it quite fascinating with the invention of all of these new, and it's like capitalism in action, isn't it? It's the bad infinite, like the kind of explosion, like it won't stop, growth won't stop, like beyond the atmosphere, it will keep going into space as we're seeing. But yeah, the invention of new competitions, new forms of sports,
exactly,
is really quite interesting. Like
crazy to say cricket, they keep.
Yeah, and it's just like there's game after game after game, and it's with its growth become like you see its meaninglessness as well because of the excess, because of the sheer volume of stuff. And I did have a question about like creativity again and content and the idea of content, the excess of content, and everything's the same,
exactly,
but trying to be slightly different, but it's all within a particular paradigm, but it becomes meaningless through just its vastness, and yet that is also the thing that when capital is driving that, it's trying to make more, reproduce more of itself and all of that stuff, but it's also rendering itself more and more meaningless.
Exactly. Yeah, but I always think one of the things about sport is just like, how arbitrary it is. Yeah. And it's interesting, there are loads of things today where I think we're kind of like missing the pointless ethos of sport by trying to make it more kind of sacrosanct and transcendent, when it's like, no, we have a 400-meter track and it's like, right, got a timer, like here's a hurdle, whack a hurdle in, like this one. Or like, I always find the swimming hilarious. It's like, how many different ways to really weirdly make yourself not get somewhere. Like,
that's why I love speed walking. The power walking is my favorite for that. It's like you can go faster than that, but you're like limited.
I love the way as well, like they have to have the spotters to really make sure you're doing the power walk, because obviously you could really easily get into a run, which is much more like expedient, but the whole point is to not be expedient, it's to like have this random obstacle.
Exactly. Yeah. What sport did you
I used to be a runner.
Okay.
My sister and it was actually my first love. So actually part of the reason why I'm really into psychoanalysis as well is that whole experience. Basically, my sister and I started to really get into training as teenagers, and we did quite well early on, and then in our late teens, both of us suddenly had loads of issues with illness and injury. And it turned out that we had a blood disorder, but it took 7 years to diagnose it. And I was so into running. Like I absolutely love it. I absolutely loved it. And I was failing, and there was no understanding as to why. And I tried everything. And it was just this compulsion, there was something of running that was way more than I had this excessive, relationship to it. And then as soon as I discovered my health condition, I did stop. I went on in 2013, my last run down the coast there, and I ran like 3 miles away and then just stopped. And having been somebody who trained, few hours most days. Wow. It was a big change, and I actually have not done really anything since. But I absolutely love running. It's so and it was the pointlessness, but also the point. The arbitrariness like really inspires this. And as you say, the failure to, and I think partly the fact maybe that I was failing because of my health condition and not knowing why I was failing made me keep going. Maybe if I hadn't had all the health problems, and at 18, I started to sort of get on well at 19. So it was all kind of fine before that. But, done something really great. Maybe I would have just been like, right, that's me done, and there was a huge amount of dissatisfaction because of that. But looking back, I'm actually quite proud of all the things that I did with running. And I really, I think sport's fantastic. And obviously, there's so many, today, loads of people are saying that, sport is sort of like the sort of fascism of the body, and the nationalism or using the ideology of national pride to sort of discipline people into being more submissive workers at the Olympics. And I'm actually just like, it's kind of just nice. It's another one of these pointless things that makes life worth living because of our excessive investment in it.
Yeah.
Because it's so pointless.
Yeah.
I think it's a really positive thing. But the content question though is a really interesting one, because as you say, and Todd talks about this a lot, we believe that we live in this sort of free market where everything is the creative powers are unleashed, and in a certain extent that's true, but also it renders everything the same. And content is an amazing example of this, and you see this with the likes of kind of music videos, where you will see the same techniques, the same shots, the same aesthetics, because you have to, the guarantee of that having worked before is what is required for something that's like a corporate product. Or these car ads that all look the same, and they can be, a lot of them are very aesthetically nice, but obviously Marx talks about this a lot, but everything that is sacred is profaned, everything is rendered equal. Yeah,
and the interesting thing about that car advert that I was reflecting on was the fact that almost within it, and it is another one of those, it does stir something. It doesn't make me want to buy the car, but it does make me yearn for something nicer.
Absolutely. I think I'm big into emotions. I think like films are like emotional curation. I love emotion. I love, as I say, I love crying. I love being with people who are crying and having deep conversations and laughing and all these kinds of things. But there's a certain type of emotion that you get that gets conjured up in you that I think is always ideological. And it's like the warm, fuzzy feeling, like reassuringly, like that sort of, sometimes get sort of like a goosebumps or something. And it's really hard to put your finger on, but I definitely think that you can sort of categorize feelings from like feelings about the joy of the difficulty of existence and being on this planet for a short period of time, what a crazy experience that is. And then this stuff that imprisons us with an ideology, the warm, fuzzy feeling.
Do you know what? I know the exact feeling you're talking about, and I get it from the scene in Toy Story, the pizza planet in Toy Story, where if you've seen Toy Story, and I think it's where they get the little alien with the claw. There's something about that gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling that is completely tied up in
ideology.
Yeah.
I know. I think the one that is very, very common is when you see. So, for instance, one of the reasons why the Paralympics is great is it's like people who have disabilities are doing great things just like everybody else. Like they're like everybody else, And I think the thing that's really offensive, but it's also tied to that warm, fuzzy feeling, is when it's sort of like, oh, aren't they special or whatever? When actually, and that warm, fuzzy people that, they've overcome such adversity and they've achieved so much. And that's the sort of, ideological belief that there are these individuals who are whole and complete because of their contingent, ways of being in the world. They're like children or angels.
Mm-hmm.
And so that warm, fuzzy feeling of that, like, I was thinking like 2012 Olympics, they had that elbow song that was like, that kind of music. And it's like, or when you get somebody who's, we have these ideological divisions in terms of, like with this racialist stuff where somebody from a given group who can teach us so much about I think, when you listen to the Return to Innocence, part of the reason why it's so popular is it conjures up that feeling in people, which is like, you can get back to that guttural oneness. And these people here with their beautiful earthy tones, it's like, no, they're human beings as well.
Mm-hmm. Just
as the people who are competing in the Paralympics in a way that is just as impressive as, the Olympics. And it's nothing to do with them being special, innocent people. It's like, wow, what an achievement, just like as it is to run a marathon or win a gold medal in the 100 meters.
Yeah, the Return to Innocence is definitely that warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah. Totally is. Yeah.
Because hearing the sort of the call with it's the chord progression underneath it and everything. It is like a woo.
That's exactly it. That like tingling up the spine.
Yeah.
No, totally.
I want to kind of go into Todd McGowan's stuff a little bit because, you cite his book, Capitalism and Desire, quite a lot. It's a book I read for the first time this year, and everybody should read it. It's like
honestly, it's so good. And the trouble is, it's because it's good, because it actually is useful. You won't get a big audience because we have to have the commodity that promises, but that definitely doesn't deliver. If it did deliver, the whole thing would stop. The whole process of bad information accumulation would stop. But it's an amazing book. I mean, I'd read a few of Todd's books before. That one, it just it did actually transform my way of thinking. Although sometimes I kind of feel like it's like somebody said this on a podcast in Books and Psychoanalysis, I think the interviewer said it's like the unthought known, where it's like, I think we all kind of know a lot of this stuff at a certain level, but we don't have the words to express it. And obviously a lot of those words and those thoughts are repressed because within a world where everything is commoditized and everything must be a promise that fails, when something is actually correct, it won't rise to the light of day.
I think that's a great way of describing exactly my experience of reading the book, and it's why I really like your podcast as well. It's because it almost brings to life things that are in me, like that. It's like that's it. That's the thought that's there. But I've never been.
It's also sometimes like with Todd, and I've said this to him. It's like, cheers, Todd. You've like made me confront something that's really not. That's obviously very useful and life transforming, but it's not great in terms of like now. Obviously, again, it's funny also looking back to like my earlier work before I'd even encountered Todd's work, before I met Peter. It was all dealing with the same stuff anyway, but less explicitly maybe.
Yeah.
Well, not even less explicitly like it was, but I always sort of feel like now, for instance, with our projects, we always told it's too philosophical. We're making a documentary right now and it opens with a warning that says, explicit philosophical content, viewer discretion advised. Because it's like, I've actually got to the point where I'm like, it's what I do, sorry, and then like some people will want, and it basically, it's like, I'm not exactly going to get like a Hollywood studio making a screenplay because it's like, it's just not dealing with the same things. But that's maybe all for the better, because again, as we know, working with Hollywood wouldn't be, whilst it is an aspiration for many, it would not assuage our sort of massive gaping gap of lack, and it would come with all kinds of problems and stresses as well, and you wouldn't be able to be as creative as you would otherwise with all these different pressures. So
how are you funding projects? How does that work?
It's a lot of different things. We have let's see, track all the different projects. We've crowdfunded, we've had private donors from individuals who are interested in seeing this work made. Sometimes I will do other work. There's various things that I do to raise money, and then I put all that money into project. We have a project that's with a bigger studio, and we're using any profits from that to put into a very tiny feature film. There's a university here that works on, it's a former polytechnic that does really, really great work, animation and film department in different kinds of media. So we've worked with them on a project that we're also working with a studio in the States, also at a university. Loads of different ways, but it can be, I mean, I think it's universally difficult to raise money for film anyway. And I think maybe in a way, even despite us doing philosophical stuff or more explicitly kind of non-ideological, we say that, I kind of also annoys me when people say you can't, everybody is ideological, you can't be beyond ideology. And I beg to differ. I think you can, if your ideology, quote unquote, is nothing itself. It's like, are you religious if your religion is a religion of no religion? You know, in the Jajekian sense. But because we do have a set of things that we want to say, there are interested parties, and it's a very small audience often, which is a shame, because I think, as you said with Todd's book, if people get the opportunity, like, people do like this stuff. People do know it. You know, people do feel it. Yeah. Especially at times when things are so toxic in the discourse, and when, you know, we're fed certain things, or we have a tendency to be reactive and oppositional. And there is a whole world out there where it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, and you see, I mean, you don't have to go far to see people sort of skirting around these ideas in the discourse, even on social media and everything. Yeah, it's like, yes, there's a kind of kernel of an idea there that is speaking the same language.
Yes, exactly.
But then it's often the structure with which they engage that can cause it's the,
and it's so difficult not to be within this ideology of promise. So with this stuff, it's also, people might say, well, I can get to a place where I'm not self-sabotaging if I embrace lack. But if you're focusing on the non-self-sabotaging, then you're not embracing lack. And also, because, for instance, we're doing a project with a bigger company, and it's been really interesting in many ways, but obviously it's had to change. Like, the film that we were going to make is not what's getting made now. But aspects of it are. And interestingly, this company really liked what we were doing, but they knew that it wasn't sellable to a streaming service. So then things had to be changed. But obviously that means that, but the fact that the executives, even despite the fact that, like, on a corporate level, that's never going to get made. You can make it independently. But everything, you know, festivals, obviously a corporate, distribution operates in a corporate sense, you know, these massive studios, and the film industry is bigger than ever, and there's more and more content made. But because the imperative is profit, and profit relies on sacrifice. So if we point out how sacrifice operates and how it's kind of toxic and who are the victims of sacrifice, do we really want to point out that on a corporate level? A, no. But B, we have to offer a promise. Otherwise, people aren't compelled to buy it.
Yeah, I suppose it's that balance of, because within that system, within the ideology itself, there needs to be the cracks that allow the critique, but on its own terms.
Yeah, on like a domesticated way. But as we know from Hegel, and this is what the whole phenomenology is about, how we sort of fall forward into these different forms of societal structures, it's actually really bad even to have like, let's say, and this is actually really, well, if we don't have critique, and that's what we were talking about before, about the lack of conversation, we will fail. Like, we are an invested party with ourselves. That's why we go to psychoanalysis and talk to somebody else who can read our slips and our unconscious in a way that we haven't even noticed. As a divided subject, there's parts of ourselves we can't see, and we are an interested party. We require the other to expose ourselves to ourselves. So a system that has no other is fucked, but doubly fucked when it does the aesthetic move of bringing it in and domesticating it, which you do see a lot today.
Yeah.
When I kind of saw, I wouldn't be surprised, and I've seen this sort of a trend of this, if workers at Amazon start being called comrades, you know, that kind of thing, where it does. And this is what we're talking about. Like, nothing really matters on an aesthetic level. It's about, at the end of the day, an exposing of the ideology of promise.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And anybody can do it. Anybody can say it. You could make a police cop thriller about it. You could write a song about it. You could give a speech about it. It's just about an exposing of the ideology of promise.
I guess it's, when we use the phrase like, in order to, so like I would meditate in order to get whatever thing, or I would eat this in order to blah, blah, blah. Which I suppose is where then that kind of utopian libidinal thing exists.
Exactly.
It's trying to get to that.
Exactly.
That place. Yeah.
And the thing is as well, because sometimes I think maybe people will be like, well, then how do you make money? How do you exist? But actually, again, this is not to have any promise about it, but when you've come to this realization, you can end up doing more things that you want to do and actually be more productive. The thing is, often, unfortunately, it isn't very conducive to the market to say these things.
No, that's one of the problems, isn't it?
One of the problems. And I have this, I know from what I've done sort of psychoanalysis for a couple of years now, so I kind of know why this is. But I, unfortunately, have this issue where I'm in an institution for, let's say, about a year, and I can point out all of the moral, ethical failures, repressions. I don't know what it is. Well, actually, I do know what it is. But anyway, we all have our little quirks. So I just can't help it. I wish I didn't see it, but I do. I do. But, and again, I could be wrong, This is just... But I think lots of people, and as I say, reading Todd, it was this unthought name. We're like, this person has very clearly and much better than me expressed this.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, I will let you go. Sorry to. It's just, I love talking about all of this. Really... And
I apologize if this was too heady, because sometimes it just ends up being that way.
Well, it's, I think it probably has been very heady, but it's also great.
But also the thing is, I think that, I'm really into Zizek, and I must have, in my early 20s, listened to every single one of his lectures. And you don't really get what he's saying in terms of an A, B, and C. It sort of washes over you, and it gradually becomes the way you think more clearly. And I sometimes think, as we do with we open up with a kind of written piece sometimes. And sometimes it can be quite hard to, and this is what I think Todd, sometimes Americans, I don't know if it's their education system, they write very clearly, and French people, and I think part of the problem, well, actually no, because I think often an issue today is we have edutainment that makes people feel clever, which is actually quite dangerous. And it's not to say that people aren't clever, but it doesn't challenge, but it gives you this ideological satisfaction.
Dunning-Kruger thing.
The Dunning-Kruger effect. And you see this so much now, but I actually think it's good to challenge and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes writing that, when you're kind of talking about things in a dialectical sense, writing a sort of a piece can be quite difficult. And often you end up just saying the same thing in loads of different ways. And as they say, with this way of thinking, and sort of a Lacanian point, it's like a web. Everything relates to everything else. So as soon as you understand commodity satisfaction and surplus value or ideology of promise, you kind of understand everything. This is how I would, or how I've engaged, listening to Todd's podcast, Why Theory, and, Pete's, I suppose, Pete's sort of lectures and seminars and things like that. It's kind of the moment that you try and understand or try and sort of control your interpretation of what is being said, it becomes overwhelming. But over time, you're just sort of exposing yourself to these things, and it is, you sort of, and you hear things in different ways as well. You hear things in different ways, yeah.
I listen to Why Theory episodes, kind of 2 or 3 times, but over a long period, and I'm like, I do not remember them saying that. It's maybe something's switched in me. I've understood something else somewhere else, and that suddenly makes sense. But Absolutely. It wasn't that it didn't make sense before. It's just it didn't make sense in this way.
You hear something new in it.
I
know,
so weird.
Exactly. And I do sort of think sometimes, and Pete's had this a little bit, that people can be so reactive against it. But sometimes the reaction speaks to the fact that there's a truth there and that people recognize it. But knowing your own desires is also really useful. I think would be a really useful thing for the world in general. And acknowledging them and not repressing the truth of them. We all are imbued with contingent desires because of our upbringing, nature is nurture, and all that. So I think this stuff helps you recognize your desire as well, because it's about kind of exposing the ideological structures that we live in so that we can get to something closer to a truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, that was fun. I apologize. I go on for way too long.
Yeah, no, it's really, really great. I really appreciate you taking that time.